On a freezing winter night, a struggling mother was forced to return her baby's formula. She thought it was just another loss in a life full of them. She didn't know a U.S. Marine and his K-9 were watching. What happened next wasn't charity. It wasn't coincidence. It was a quiet miracle. One decision that would change not just one life, but generations. This is the story of faith, sacrifice, and how God sometimes answers prayers through strangers. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and unbreakable bonds. Your support truly means everything. The winter night descended over Bozeman, Montana, heavy with snow and mountain wind. The kind that pressed silence into the streets and made every step feel earned. Emily Whitaker moved through that silence with careful determination, her boots worn thin, crunching softly against the icy sidewalk. She was 28, slight in build, standing just over 5 feet tall. Her body narrowed by years of stretching meals and sleep thin. Her blonde hair, once bright, now dulled by stress and cold, was pulled into a loose, uneven knot beneath a faded knit hat. Pale skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. Her face, marked not by age, but by endurance. Her eyes were a clear gray blue, the color of winter sky just before snowfall. Eyes that carried exhaustion but refused to surrender to it. In her arms, she carried her daughter, Hannah, 9 months old, wrapped in a pink blanket that had lost its softness long ago. Hannah was small for her age, her cheeks faintly flushed from the cold, her tiny breaths forming soft clouds against the fabric. One mittened hand poked out, fingers curling and uncurling as she whimpered quietly, sensing the tension in her mother's body. Emily tightened her hold instinctively, her chin dipping to shield Hannah's face from the wind. Almost there, she whispered, voice thin but steady. Just a little more, sweetheart. Emily had no car. She had sold it the previous winter when rent went up and her hours were cut. Tonight, she had counted her cash twice before leaving. $24 and some change folded carefully in the pocket of her coat. No bus fare, no backup plan, just a list in her head and a quiet prayer that prices hadn't changed. The automatic doors of the grocery store slid open with a hiss, releasing a wave of warm air that made Emily's eyes sting. She paused just inside, adjusting Hannah in her arms, breathing in the smell of bread and detergent and something fried. It felt almost luxurious after the cold. She grabbed a cart with one hand and eased Hannah into the child's seat, wrapping the blanket tighter around her small body. Hannah fussed, then settled, her eyes blinking slowly beneath the fluorescent lights. Emily moved through the aisles with practiced efficiency. She avoided looking at anything unnecessary. Store brand, discount oatmeal, apples in the clearance bin, bruised but salvageable. She calculated as she went, numbers stacking and subtracting in her mind. She did not allow herself to linger. Lingering led to wanting, and wanting led to disappointment. Then she reached the formula aisle. She stopped. The shelves were stacked neatly, rows of cans promising nourishment and relief. Emily's stomach tightened as her eyes found the familiar label, hypoallergenic, soy-based, doctor recommended. The only formula Hannah could tolerate without breaking out in painful rashes or crying for hours in distress. Emily reached for the can, her fingers trembling despite her effort to remain calm. She turned it over to check the price, $41.99. The number felt like a physical blow. Her breath caught, and for a moment, the sounds of the store faded into a dull hum. She stood there, frozen, the can heavy in her hands. She did the math again, slower this time, as if that might change the outcome. It didn't. She considered putting everything else back. Bread, oatmeal, apples. Even then, it wouldn't be enough. Her throat tightened. Hannah let out a small cry, and Emily flinched, glancing around. Self-consciously before leaning in to stroke her daughter's cheek. "Shoo," she murmured. "Mom's here." Her hand hovered. Then, against her better judgment, she placed the can gently into the cart. Maybe she could ask. Maybe she could explain. Maybe there was a way to leave her name. Promised to come back Friday when her paycheck cleared. Hope, thin as it was, slipped in through the cracks. At the checkout, Emily unloaded her items one by one. The cashier, a teenage girl with dark hair, pulled into a messy ponytail, chewed gum, and scanned items without expression. The total flashed on the screen. $27.83. Emily swallowed. She opened her wallet and laid out her bills, smoothing them flat with shaking fingers. I only have 24, she said quietly. I'll need to put the formula back. The cashier reached for the can without comment and slid it aside. A man behind Emily sighed audibly, tapping his foot. Emily's face burned. She nodded, paid for what she could, and pushed the cart toward the exit, her shoulders hunched as if to shield herself from more than just the cold. Outside, the wind had intensified, snow falling heavier now, thick flakes spiraling beneath the street lights. Near the far end of the storefront, a man stood watching. Staff Sergeant Logan Hayes was 36, tall and broad-shouldered, his posture straight even in repose. His face was angular, carved with sharp lines and a strong jaw, dusted with short, dark stubble. A faint scar cut through his right eyebrow, pale against weathered skin, browned by years of sun and field exposure. His eyes were dark, steady, observant, eyes that missed very little. He wore a heavy olive-green Marine Corps winter jacket, marpad trousers, black gloves, and scuffed combat boots dusted with snow. He was home on leave, though the uniform still clung to him like a second skin. At his side sat Ranger. The German Shepherd was 4 years old, muscular but lean, with a thick Amberton coat that gleamed even beneath the falling snow. His ears stood erect, alert, and his intelligent dark eyes tracked movement with quiet focus. Ranger was trained, disciplined, and deeply bonded to Logan. He had served alongside him overseas, seen things no animal should, and emerged with a calm vigilance that bordered on human awareness. He rarely barked. He didn't need to. As Emily stepped into the cold, Hannah's soft cry reached Rare's ears. The dog's head snapped up, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of distress. Without command, he stood and moved forward, positioning himself between Emily and the wind, his body angled protectively. He glanced back once at Logan, eyes intent. Logan followed his gaze. He saw Emily standing near the bus stop, arms wrapped tightly around her child, her breath shallow, her face drawn with worry and fatigue. He saw the empty cart, the small grocery bag, the way she rocked gently despite the cold biting into her coat. Something in his chest tightened. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. Logan had seen that look before in mirrors, in refugee camps, in the faces of civilians caught in circumstances beyond their control. He felt Ranger shift beside him, steady and resolute, a silent question in his posture. Logan exhaled slowly. All right, he murmured, more to himself than to the dog. Rare's tail flicked once. Snow continued to fall, thick and unrelenting, as Logan turned back toward the store, his boots leaving deep prints behind him. He did not yet know how this night would change the course of his life. He only knew that walking away was no longer an option. Behind him, Emily tightened her hold on Hannah, unaware that somewhere in the swirl of snow and light, a decision had just been made, one that would reach far beyond this night. Logan Hayes did not hesitate once he turned back into the store. The automatic doors parted again, spilling light onto his boots as snow clung to the hem of his trousers. Inside, the warmth hit him, but it did nothing to ease the tightness in his chest. He moved with purpose, the same deliberate pace he used on patrols, eyes scanning shelves without distraction. He went straight to the formula aisle and lifted the same hypoallergenic and Emily had held minutes earlier. It felt heavier now, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. He added it to his cart without checking the price. Money had never been the thing that mattered to him. Responsibility was. Passing a display of children's winter accessories, he paused and picked out a pair of fleece-lined mittens, pale blue, small enough for an infant. He imagined how cold Emily's hands had looked gripping that blanket. In the hot food section, steam fogged the glass as he selected chicken noodle soup in a container of macaroni and cheese, simple food meant to warm rather than impress. At the bakery, he added a soft pack of dinner rolls, still warm to the touch. He paid in cash, nodded once to the cashier, and left without waiting for change. Outside, the storm had worsened. Snow blew sideways now, driven by sharp gusts that howled between buildings. Logan zipped his jacket higher and scanned the parking lot. He spotted Emily immediately beneath the narrow shelter of the bus stop, her body curled protectively around her child. Ranger, who had waited faithfully by the storefront, stood the moment Logan stepped back into the cold. The dog moved ahead, positioning himself instinctively between the wind and the fragile pair, his broad frame acting as a living barrier. Emily startled when she noticed them approach, her grip tightening around Hannah, her instincts flared, the same ones sharpened by months of doing everything alone. Logan stopped a respectful distance away. He was tall enough that he made most people look smaller without meaning to, and he knew how intimidating that could be. He softened his posture, lowered his shoulders slightly, and held the paper bag out with both hands. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm, steady, carrying no urgency. Emily's eyes flicked to the bag, then back to his face. Up close, Logan's features were more weathered than handsome, his jaw square, nose slightly crooked from a break healed, dark stubble shadowing his cheeks. His eyes, however, were gentle in a way that surprised her. They were the eyes of someone used to watching, not judging. "I think you left this behind," he said. Emily shook her head quickly. "No, that's not mine." Her voice was strained by cold and restraint. Logan didn't move. "It is now," he replied simply. She stared at him, confusion giving way to embarrassment. "I can't," she said, a reflex more than a decision. "I don't take charity." Logan glanced down at about Hannah, then back at Emily. "It's not charity," he said quietly. "It's obligation. One person to another." The words surprised even him. He hadn't planned them, but they felt right. Ranger took a small step forward then, lowering his head and gently pressing his nose against Emily's gloved hand. The warmth of the dog's breath cut through the cold. Emily froze. No one had touched her with kindness in a long time. Her composure cracked, tears welled in her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. She turned her face away, ashamed of the weakness, but Ranger stayed, unmoving, his presence steady and wordless. Hannah whimpered softly, sensing the shift in her mother. Emily swallowed hard, then slowly reached for the bag with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. Logan nodded once, accepting them without ceremony. For a moment, they stood there together as snow gathered on their coats. The world narrowed to the quiet rhythm of Hannah's breathing and the distant rumble of traffic. The wind howled again, sharper this time. Logan followed Emily's glance down the empty road. "Where are you headed?" he asked. She hesitated. "Livingston," she said finally. "Maple Street. It's about 1.5 miles." Logan frowned slightly. He knew that stretch of road poorly lit and exposed. "That's too far in this," he said. "Let me drive you." Emily's head snapped up. "No," she said immediately. "I can't ask that." Logan shook his head. "You're not asking," he replied. "I'm offering." Silence stretched between them. Emily looked down at Hannah, then at the bag of food, then at Ranger, who sat obediently now, eyes alert but calm. Her pride battled her fear, but fear won. "For her," she said softly. "Only for her." Logan inclined his head. "Of course." His SUV waited nearby, dusted with snow. He opened the rear door, laying a blanket across the seat before Emily climbed in carefully. Ranger hopped up beside her, settling close enough that his warmth radiated through the fabric of her coat. Logan took the driver's seat, started the engine, and eased onto the road as snow continued to fall in thick sheets. Inside the vehicle, the heater hummed, slowly chasing the cold away. Emily relaxed by degrees, her shoulders lowering inch by inch. Ranger watched Hannah intently, his ears flicking at every sound she made, as if memorizing her existence. They drove in silence for several minutes. The kind of silence that wasn't awkward, just careful. Finally, Emily spoke. "I'm Emily," she said. Logan glanced at her in the rear-view mirror. "Logan," he replied. "And that's Ranger." Rare's tail thumped once against the seat. Emily managed a small, tired smile. "He's beautiful," she said. "He looks like he understands everything." Logan exhaled softly. "Sometimes I think he understands more than I do." Livingston appeared through the snow, its small houses hunched beneath white blankets. Logan slowed as they turned onto Maple Street. Emily pointed out a narrow driveway beside a weathered building. Logan parked and cut the engine. For a moment, neither moved. Emily clutched the bag to her chest like a lifeline. "I don't know how to repay you," she said quietly. Logan shook his head. "You don't," he replied. "Just get home safe." Ranger wed softly as Emily opened the door, reluctant to leave the warmth. She paused, then looked back at Logan. "You didn't have to stop," she said. Logan met her gaze. "I know," he answered. Emily stepped out into the snow, Hannah tucked close, and disappeared toward the building. Logan watched until the door closed behind her. Only then did he pull away. Ranger settling back into his seat, eyes still fixed on where Emily had gone. Something had shifted that night. Subtle but undeniable, like the first crack in ice before it breaks. Logan didn't know it yet, but the storm had already carried him somewhere new. The apartment in Livingston, Montana, was quiet in the way only old buildings ever were, the kind of quiet that creaked inside softly, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Emily Whitaker closed the door behind her with care, keeping the noise low so as not to wake Hannah if the baby drifted off. The warmth inside was uneven but welcome, rising from a small space heater tucked against the far wall. The room was narrow, low ceiling, and worn by time, but it was clean, immaculately so. Every surface wiped, every object placed with intention, as if order itself were a form of defense against chaos. Emily moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to live lightly. She was still wrapped in her coat, her shoulders stiff from the cold and the long walk that might have been if Logan had not stopped. She laid the paper bag on the counter with reverence, as though it contained something fragile rather than soup, bread, and formula. Only then did she exhale fully, the tension she had carried all evening loosening from her spine. Hannah stirred in her arms, her small face puckering before relaxing again. Emily smiled down at her, a tired, luminous smile that softened the sharp lines of her face. "We're home," she whispered, more for herself than for the child. She set Hannah gently into a makeshift play area near the couch, a thick quilt spread over the floor. The quilt was patchwork stitched together from old flannel shirts and faded dresses, the seams uneven but strong. Around it sat a collection of handmade toys, a rattle fashioned from a pill bottle filled with dried beans, a soft fabric book sewn from scraps, cardboard shapes painted in cheerful colors. None of it matched. None of it was new, but each piece carried evidence of care and patience. Logan stood just inside the doorway, Ranger at his side, taking it all in. He had seen poverty before. True, grinding poverty, but this place was different. It wasn't neglect that marked the apartment. It was restraint. Emily lived within the narrow borders of what she could control, and she controlled it fiercely. The faint scent of lavender soap lingered in the air, clean and calming, a quiet rebellion against hardship. Ranger stepped forward first, his paws silent against the worn carpet. He lowered his head and sniffed the quilt, then glanced back at Logan for permission before settling near Hannah, his body curved protectively. Logan nodded, trusting the dog's instincts as he always had. Ranger lay down, ears alert but relaxed, his amber coat catching the soft glow of a single lamp perched on a side table. Emily shrugged out of her coat and hung it carefully on a hook by the door. Beneath it, she wore a thin sweater stretched slightly at the elbows. The color faded from too many washes. Her movements were gentle but purposeful. "I know it's not much," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of apology she hadn't intended. "But it's warm most nights." Logan shook his head. "It's enough," he said, and he meant it. He removed his gloves, tucking them into his jacket pocket, and finally allowed himself to look around more closely. That was when he saw the photograph. It hung above the couch in a simple wooden frame, slightly crooked, as if it had been taken down and replaced more than once. The photograph was black and white, its edges worn soft with age. It showed a young Marine in desert fatigues, helmet tucked under one arm, his posture straight, but his expression unguarded. He had light hair, cropped short, and eyes that seemed both weary and resolute. Beneath the image was a small brass plaque polished by frequent touch. Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Whitaker, Operation Iraqi Freedom, 2004. Logan felt the air leave his lungs. For a moment, the room tilted, memories slamming into him with the force of an explosion long buried but never forgotten. He stared at the face in the photograph, his mind racing, heart pounding. He knew that face, not from a picture, but from smoke and fire, from chaos and screaming metal. His pulse roared in his ears. Emily noticed the change immediately. She followed his gaze, her expression softening. "That's my grandfather," she said quietly. "Thomas Whitaker." She moved closer, standing beside him. "He raised me after my parents died. He was everything." Her voice faltered just slightly, then steadied. He passed a few months before Hannah was born. Logan didn't answer right away, his jaw tightened, his hands curling slowly into fists at his sides. He swallowed, forcing his voice to cooperate. He was a Marine, he said, though it wasn't a question. Emily nodded. 22 years. He never talked much about Iraq, just said it changed him, made him quieter, kinder somehow. She smiled faintly. He believed in doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. Logan stepped back, the weight in his chest unbearable now. He muttered an apology, barely audible, and turned toward the door. Emily hesitated, but didn't stop him. Ranger rose immediately, sensing the shift, and followed close behind. The drive back to Bozeman passed in a blur of headlights and falling snow. Logan barely remembered turning the key, barely registered the heater humming to life. His mind had traveled years back, dragged into the desert heat of a place he had tried unsuccessfully to leave behind. At his house, Logan shut the door quietly behind him and leaned against it, eyes closed. Ranger sat nearby, watching him with calm, intelligent concern. "Easy, buddy," Logan murmured, though he wasn't sure who he was reassuring. He moved through the darkened living room and into the small study at the back of the house. From the top shelf of a closet, he pulled down a cedar box, its surface scratched and dulled with age. The box smelled faintly of wood and dust when he opened it. Inside were medals, folded flags, and a bundle of letters tied with green twine. Logan sank into the chair by the desk, the weight of exhaustion pressing into his bones. He untied the string with careful fingers, selecting one envelope worn thinner than the rest. The letter was dated July 2004. As he read, the room faded away. The convoy had been moving through a narrow stretch of road outside Fallujah when the blast hit. The vehicle in front of them erupted, metal folding like paper. Logan had been thrown hard, pinned beneath wreckage, his leg trapped, Ranger barking frantically beside him despite shrapnel embedded in his flank. Smoke, heat, screaming. Logan remembered thinking with strange clarity that this was how it ended. Then hands, strong, relentless hands tearing metal away, a voice shouting orders through the chaos. A man with light hair and eyes full of command and compassion, hauling Logan free, refusing to leave until Ranger was dragged out too, bleeding but alive. Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Whitaker. Logan remembered his name because he had carved it into memory like a promise. Logan lowered the letter slowly, his hands shaking. The photograph on Emily's wall, the name, the timing. Fate had folded in on itself, closing a circle he hadn't known was open. Ranger patted over and rested his head on Logan's knee, warm and solid. Logan placed a hand on the dog's neck, fingers sinking into familiar fur. "He saved us," Logan whispered. "And now?" He looked up at the ceiling, breath unsteady. The answer was already forming, firm and unavoidable. He would not repay this debt with money slipped quietly into a grocery bag. He would not reduce it to charity. Thomas Whitaker had given him life when he didn't have to. That kind of gift demanded something enduring. Logan straightened, resolve settling into place like armor. "We're going to do this right," he said aloud, his voice steady again. Rare's ears flicked, tail thumping once. Outside, the storm continued to fall, blanketing the town in white. Somewhere across that snow-covered distance, Emily Whitaker slept beside her daughter beneath the gaze of a photograph on the wall. Unaware that the past had reached forward and claimed her future, Helena, Montana wore winter differently than Bozeman or Livingston. The cold here felt quieter, more official somehow, settling over the state capitol like a held breath. Snow clung to the edges of government buildings and old brick offices, softening their severity, but not erasing it. Inside one of those buildings, on a street lined with bare trees and flag poles, something unseen was taking shape carefully, deliberately, without applause. The Whitaker Legacy Fund did not begin with a press release or a ceremony. It began with paperwork. Logan Hayes sat alone at a long wooden table in a small conference room, sleeves rolled up, forearms scarred and weathered, pen moving steadily across form after form. He wore civilian clothes now, dark jeans, a plain charcoal sweater, but the discipline of the Marine Corps still lived in his posture. His shoulders were squared, his movements economical, his focus absolute. Ranger lay at his feet, chin resting on his paws, amber eyes half-closed but alert, the quiet sentinel he had always been. Across from Logan sat Margaret Collins, director of a veterans outreach nonprofit based in Helena. She was in her late 50s, tall and angular, with iron gray hair cut short and sharp features softened by kind eyes. Years of advocacy had left her voice calm but firm, her manner efficient without being cold. She had learned long ago that compassion worked best when paired with structure. "You're certain you want this to be anonymous?" she asked, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed the final document. Logan nodded. "It's not about my name," he said. "It never was." Margaret studied him for a moment, noting the way his jaw tightened when he spoke of the past, the way Ranger shifted closer when emotions stirred. "And the scope," she pressed. "Education support, administrative placement, child care stipends. It's a significant commitment." Logan didn't hesitate. "It needs to be," he replied. "One chance isn't enough. People need a path." Margaret inclined her head slowly. She had seen donors driven by guilt, by ego, by grief. This was different. This was debt repaid with intention. When the last signature was inked, Margaret slid the folder closed. "The Whitaker Legacy Fund," she said quietly, "in honor of Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Whitaker." Logan exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor. The call came 3 weeks later on a gray afternoon in Livingston. Emily Whitaker was folding laundry beside Hannah's playmat when her phone rang. She almost ignored it, assuming it was another automated reminder or an unknown number with nothing to offer. Hannah lay on her back, gnawing contentedly on a rubber teether, her legs kicking in slow, happy rhythm. Emily wiped her hands on her jeans and answered, "Hello." The woman on the other end introduced herself as Sarah Linton from the Helena of Veterans Support Office. Sarah was in her early 40s, her voice warm but professional, the kind of voice that suggested both competence and patience. She explained that Emily's old application submitted months earlier and long forgotten had resurfaced. "We'd like to invite you for an interview," Sarah said. "There's been a new development, a grant." Emily sat down hard on the couch. "I'm sorry," she said. "A grant?" Sarah chuckled softly. "Yes, and a part-time administrative position, paid training, and the option to return to school if you choose. It's all outlined, but we'd rather discuss it in person." Emily's throat tightened. "Why me?" she asked, the question instinctive. There was a pause on the line. "Because," Sarah said carefully, "this fund was created for people exactly like you." The interview room in Helena was modest, sunlit through tall windows, a small American flag in the corner. Emily sat at the table clutching a worn folder, her posture straight but tense. She wore her best clothes, a navy blouse bought secondhand, black slacks pressed the night before. Her blonde hair was pulled back neatly, loose strands framing her face. She looked younger than her years and older, too, the way hardship compressed time. Sarah Linton greeted her with a warm smile. In person, Sarah was medium height, broad-shouldered, with chestnut hair weathered by years of fieldwork rather than office lights. She listened more than she spoke, nodding as Emily explained her work history, her goals, her circumstances. When Sarah finally slid the folder across the table, Emily's hands shook. Inside were details of the Whitaker Legacy Fund, tuition assistance, guaranteed part-time employment, child care support, a future that until that moment had existed only as a fragile hope. Emily stared at the name on the header. "Whitaker," she whispered. "That's my we know," Sarah said gently. "Your grandfather's service record is part of the Foundation's mission." The ceremony was held 2 months later in Helena's Civic Hall, a space filled with flags, photographs of veterans, and quiet anticipation. Emily stood near the front with Hannah in her arms, her heart pounding. The room buzzed with polite conversation, but beneath it ran a current of curiosity. People whispered. Some glanced at Logan, seated a few rows back, Ranger lying calmly at his feet. Others looked at Emily, their expressions unreadable. As the Whitaker Legacy Fund was formally announced, applause filled the room. Then the murmurs began. "She knows him," someone whispered. "That Marine, of course she got it. Must be nice," another voice murmured. Emily felt the words like pin pricks against her skin. She shifted Hannah slightly, steadying herself. She had lived with judgment before, but this was different. This threatened to stain something sacred. Logan felt it, too. He rose slowly from his chung seat, the room quieting as attention turned toward him. He walked to the front with measured steps, Ranger at his side, and faced the crowd. He held a single piece of paper in his hand, edges worn thin. His voice when he spoke was calm, but carried unmistakable authority. I didn't help Emily Whitaker because I know her, he said. I helped her because I owe my life to her grandfather. He unfolded the letter and read aloud, his words steady even as memories surged. He spoke of Iraq, of the ambush, of being trapped beneath burning metal. He spoke of Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Whitaker pulling him free, refusing to leave, saving Ranger as well. The room was silent now, every whisper extinguished. This fund, Logan continued, lowering the paper, is not charity. It is repayment, a debt of honor. Emily felt tears sting her eyes, but she stepped forward anyway. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. I didn't ask for this, she said. I didn't know any of this when I applied months ago. My grandfather didn't save a man so his granddaughter could receive favors. He did it because it was right. And I stand here not because of who I know, but because of who he was. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then applause rose, slow at first, then swelling. Some faces softened. Others looked away, ashamed. From the back of the room, a woman watched with tight lips and narrowed eyes. Her name was Linda Kessler, a mid-level donor liaison with perfectly styled blonde hair and a posture that radiated control. She had expected the spotlight to fall elsewhere, and the shift unsettled her. But she said nothing. Not yet. When the ceremony ended, Emily stepped outside into the cold sunlight, her breath visible in the air. Logan approached, stopping a respectful distance away. You handled that well, he said. Emily met his gaze. So did you. There was no triumph between them. Only relief and a shared understanding that something larger than either of them was now in motion. Above them, the winter sky stretched pale and endless, carrying forward a legacy born of fire, sacrifice, and a promise finally kept. 2 years later, Kalispell, Montana, woke beneath a gentler kind of winter light. The sun spilling pale gold across rooftops and pine branches, turning frost into something that shimmered rather than threatened. The house on Willow Creek Road was small, white-painted with a narrow porch and a roof that sighed softly as snow slid away in slow sheets. It was not grand, but it breathed with life. Inside, warmth gathered not just from the heating vents, but from voices, laughter, and the quiet certainty that no one inside was merely surviving anymore. Emily Whitaker stood in the kitchen barefoot against the cool tile, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. At 30, she carried herself differently now. She was still slender, still small-framed, but her posture had straightened, her movements confident rather than guarded. Her blonde hair was tied into a loose, practical bun, strands escaping freely, her skin warmer in tone, no longer drained by constant worry. There were faint lines at the corners of her eyes, not from exhaustion, but from smiling. On the counter beside her sat an open laptop displaying an agenda for the Whitaker Legacy Fund. Her name appeared at the top of the page beneath the title Program Coordinator. The title still startled her some mornings. Behind her, Hannah's laughter rang through the house. At nearly 3 years old, Hannah had grown sturdy and bright-eyed, her curls bouncing as she ran through the living room, clutching a stuffed bear nearly as big as she was. Her cheeks were perpetually flushed with energy, her laughter unrestrained and musical. She skidded to a stop as Ranger lumbered past her, tail wagging in broad arcs that knocked gently against furniture. The German shepherd had aged into himself, his amber coat thick and glossy, his movement slower, but still powerful. At 6 years old, Ranger carried himself with the calm authority of someone who knew his place in the world. To Hannah, he was not a dog. He was a guardian, a playmate, and in her words, my big brother. Ranger, wait. Hannah squealed as the dog trotted toward the back door, a plush toy dangling from his mouth. Ranger paused obediently, glancing back with what could only be interpreted as patience, then lowered himself to the floor so Hannah could climb awkwardly against his side. He endured the embrace with saintly tolerance, tongue lolling slightly, eyes flicking toward the kitchen as if to say, I'm doing my part. Emily watched them, spatula resting in her hand, a quiet ache swelling in her chest. Not pain, gratitude, the kind that pressed hard because it reminded her of how far they had come. The door opened, letting in a rush of cold air and the sound of boots against wood. Logan Hayes stepped inside, brushing snow from his jacket. He looked older in subtle ways, the lines at the edges of his eyes deeper, his dark hair threaded faintly with gray at the temples. But there was a softness in him now that hadn't been there before. He moved through the house with ease, as though it had always been his. His frame was still solid, broad-shouldered. His jaw still sharply cut beneath neatly kept stubble, but the rigid tension that once lived in his body had loosened. Or had shaped him. Time and purpose had reshaped him again. "Morning," he said, voice low and warm. Yaeli glanced over her shoulder. "You're late," she replied lightly. Logan smirked. Ranger insisted on stopping to investigate a suspicious snowbank. Ranger lifted his head at the mention of his name, ears pricking. Hannah laughed, patting his neck. "He's brave," she declared solemnly. Logan crossed the kitchen and poured himself coffee without asking. He leaned against the counter, watching Emily work. There was no rush between them. No need to define what they were in words. 2 years of shared dinners, quiet conversations, and mutual respect had built something sturdy. They had never promised forever. They had simply shown up again and again. Later that morning, they walked together through the nearby park, the path crunching beneath their boots. Hannah rode on Logan's shoulders, her mittened hands tangled in his hair, while Ranger trotted ahead, alert but relaxed. Emily walked beside them, her coat buttoned against the cold, her hands tucked into her pockets. She glanced at Logan occasionally, noting the way he listened to Hannah's endless commentary with genuine focus. The way his eyes softened when she laughed. "Mommy," Hannah announced suddenly, leaning forward. "Ranger says the trees are sleepy." Emily smiled. "Is that so?" she asked. Hannah nodded emphatically. "He said they're resting until spring." Logan chuckled. "Sounds like Rare's been teaching her philosophy." Rare's tail wagged. They stopped near a stand of bare aspens, sunlight filtering through their pale trunks. Emily watched Hannah slide down from Logan's shoulders and kneel to inspect a patch of snow. "You okay?" Logan asked. Quietly. Emily nodded. "Just thinking." She looked around, then back at him. 2 years ago, I was standing at a bus stop in a storm, trying not to cry. Logan met her gaze, the memory vivid in both of them. "And now?" he asked. "And now," she said softly, "I'm here." That afternoon, Emily attended a small board meeting for the Whitaker Legacy Fund at the Kalispell Community Center. The room was modest, sunlight slanting through tall windows onto a long table scattered with folders and coffee cups. Around it sat veterans, educators, and administrators, people who believed in systems that lifted rather than judged. Emily spoke with confidence, outlining new initiatives. Her voice steady, her hands calm. When questions arose, she answered them without shrinking, without apology. From the back of the room, Logan watched quietly, Ranger lying at his feet. Pride stirred in him, unforced and deep. This was not something he had given her. This was something she had built. That evening, they returned to the house as the sky deepened into shades of lavender and blue. Emily tucked Hannah into bed, brushing curls from her forehead. "Night, Mommy," Hannah murmured sleepily. "Night, Ranger." Ranger lay down beside the bed until Hannah's breathing evened, then rose and padded out silently. In the living room, Logan stood near the window, watching snow drift down in slow, deliberate patterns. Emily joined him, handing him a mug of tea. Their shoulders brushed. Neither moved away. "You ever think about that night?" Emily asked quietly. "All the time," Logan replied. Emily nodded. "Me too." She looked at him then. Really looked at him. "One small choice," she said. "That's all it was." Logan shook his head gently. It was everything. They stood together in the growing dark, the house warm behind them. The world changed not by grand gestures, but by a single moment of seeing and choosing to act. Outside snow continued to fall, all indifferent and eternal, while inside light endured. Sometimes what we call a miracle is not thunder from the sky or a voice from the heavens, but a quiet moment when God places someone in our path and asks us to choose kindness. A single decision made in the cold of an ordinary night can become the answer to a prayer someone else has been whispering in silence. In our daily lives, we pass countless moments just like that. Chances to help, to see, to care. We may never know how far one act of love will travel or how many lives it will touch long after we walk away. But God knows. And often He works through willing hands rather than grand signs. If this story moved your heart, let it be a reminder that compassion is never wasted and that even the smallest light can change the direction of a life. Share this story with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from or how this message spoke to you. And if you believe in stories that heal, inspire, and restore faith, subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey together. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps. May He bring warmth to your nights, strength to your struggles, and peace to your heart. And may you never doubt that even through ordinary people, His miracles are still unfolding.